Contrary to what you believe, my father is not abusive. He doesn't strike. He doesn't always scream at night. However, he's gradually ruining our family with something worse. He was filled with pride, rage, and the ensuing stillness. What is the most depressing aspect? My mother permits it. She grins. She prepares meals. She stands up for him. However, it's visible in her eyes. She is no longer truly present. When I was younger, I believed my parents would age gracefully. The type of elderly couple that quarrel over tea, keeps hands at the supermarket, disputes about what to watch. Does he always sleep on the same couch? That's what I assumed they were. However, now, two persons pass each other like strangers in the house where I currently reside. The basement is where my dad resides. My mother remains seated on the sofa. They are not combative. They are silent. They aren't actually alive. When I started school last spring, I moved in with them. And I was devastated by what I witnessed. My father has changed since I knew him. He is upset, agitated, resentful of everything. 10 years ago, he retired, but rather than living a joyful life, he attached himself to political tirades and online news. He yells at screens for hours on end every day. He complains about those who are unaware of his existence, being fixated on topics that are unrelated to our lives. And you can't possibly disagree with him. If you could kindly offer an alternative viewpoint, he blows up. His face flushes. He raises his voice. All of a sudden, you are no longer his child. The adversary is you. Thus, we remain silent. We are all individuals. This is because it's simpler to remain silent rather than handle his anger. However, the quiet, it's killing us. What about my mother? She was warm once, lively, had buddies all the time. Right now, she smiles as if everything is all right while she looks at game shows on her phone. She isn't, though. We are all aware of it. My sister claims that she is fading as well. She had no desire to relocate here. Back home, she had friends, a sibling, a life. However, she did as she often does and followed him, since he desired to relocate, because he detested our childhood home, because he desired authority. So she sacrificed everything, and she's trapped in his now. And we are all witnessing its disintegration. It happened slowly, painfully, and without a word. My father was once, normal that is. He put in significant effort at work. He made jokes while eating dinner. Yes, he would complain about terrible drivers or bills. However, he used to chuckle. He used to make cheesy dad jokes and play old rock music. He wasn't a particularly sensitive person. However, he arrived. Thereafter, he went into retirement. It was meant to be beneficial. He had spent decades at work. He was due for a nap. Well-earned pastimes. Deserved tranquility. However, rather than learning about life after work, politics became his new interest. Not just the type you discuss at dinner. I'm referring to a complete, all-consuming, furious obsession. It began slowly. He would mention articles he had read, dispute with the television, please forward lengthy messages that received no response to our family group chat. Then things worsened. He would corner me in the kitchen and start talking about conspiracies. He would scream for half an hour without taking a breath. Even if I only said, "I'm not sure I agree," he would lose his temper. He would contort his face. He would raise his voice. I was being brainwashed or part of the problem all of a sudden, so I stopped answering. All of us did. The explosion wasn't worthwhile. Even my mother, who was once able to soothe him, had given up trying. She gives a courteous nod. She smiles tightly, shifts the topic. However, nothing is working anymore. If the topic of conversation isn't what he wants to discuss, he'll just pout and storm off. He worked for hours at a time. She suffered for days at a time. Additionally, if you attempt to expose him, if you dare to accuse him of being unkind, controlling, or unjust, he pretends to be the victim. He acted as if everything was against him, as though simply by holding our beliefs, we are betraying him. It wears you out. There are no pals for him, no work, no pastimes. It was nothing more than a basement filled with resentment, message boards, and angry news programs. And what frightens me the most? I believe that's how he prefers it. I believe he feels alive when he is enraged. It's as if his sole remaining emotion is indignation. He would have to endure the silence if he stopped shouting and confront the man he has grown into. However, rather than turning inward, he makes an outward projection. What about our house? It isn't a home anymore. A pressure cooker is what it is. It feels like walking on glass with every chat. Silence or biased monologues permeate every mealtime. In some way, every space feels colder, as if joy had packed up and departed. I occasionally ponder what might occur if my mother did confront him. Should she forcefully place her hands on the table and utter, "That's sufficient. You have no right to speak to us in such a manner." However, she never does. Her eyes drop, plays her game shows. She texts her former coworker with a half smile. He continues to act as though this is normal. However, it isn't. Marriage isn't what this is. This group of people isn't family. There's more to this. Something heavy, poisonous, and subtly shattering us all is present. My mother used to brighten a space. She wasn't ostentatious. She was not an attention getter. However, she exuded a steady, gentle radiance. She was the kind of person who made people bow their heads when she spoke, the kind that prompted neighbors to just say hi at your house, the sort that gave a house a homely atmosphere. She had actual friends, women with whom she would share tea jokes. She used group conversations to send her recipes, memes, and short poems. Every night, she went for walks. She continued to work until she reached her 70s, and yet had time to manually send birthday cards to every member of the family. Thereafter, we relocated. In other words, he moved us. For years, my dad had detested our hometown. "The people are stupid," he said. The traffic was terrible. The political climate was disgusting. He repeatedly urged her to go. She resisted, initially softly, then with greater fervor. But after a while, she gave in, because she started working remotely, as her brother was preoccupied with his affairs, since it was simply easier than battling him any longer. Thus, she abandoned her routine, her friends, and her small comforts. She went with him to a town she didn't particularly like. And something changed when we arrived. She no longer went for nightly walks, ceased phoning her pals. She no longer finds her game shows funny. She simply exists now. She spends most of her time curled up on the couch with her phone in hand. You are viewing replays at a volume that is too low to hear clearly. She hardly ever looks at you. She hardly ever completes sentences. I sometimes question whether she even recalls her former self. She continues to work. It continues to clean. He continues to prepare his favorite dishes. He also doesn't give her credit, doesn't inquire about her day. She sighs in the kitchen while cleaning a clean pan, but she doesn't even notice. What is the most peculiar aspect of the situation? She stands up for him. She responds, "If someone claims he's disrespectful, he's simply under stress." She claims that if we confront him about his harshness, this is how he has always been. When I ask her if she's content, she responds, "I'm all right. It's just a marriage." However, it isn't. This is not how marriage should be. The silence wasn't this quiet. I cannot handle the stress. No one wants to call this silent unraveling. Also, there is texting. She is silently messaging someone all the time. And I noticed the name one evening when her phone buzzed and she neglected to turn it over. Old office, Raj. She had already collaborated with that individual. The man was someone I vaguely remembered from a couple of family gatherings. Not hurt. Nice. Always be courteous. She's texting him now. Always. I have no idea what they discuss. I have never snooped. However, occasionally I see her grinning at her phone. She smiled at my dad in a way that I hadn't seen her do in years. I don't believe it's physical, however, it's something. And a part of me doesn't hold her accountable. Because when you have a little world, when your significant other no longer sees you, when the only time your name is spoken is to inquire about dinner, you begin to crave any available light, even when it originates on a screen. Despite its seeming oddity, even if you're not prepared to acknowledge its true nature. Additionally, I believe she is aware that it is unsustainable, that there isn't a true escape. However, it provides her with more comfort than she can get elsewhere. Additionally, that I'm devastated by that. Something about our home these days is difficult to describe. It appears to be normal from the exterior. The grass has been mowed, the lights are on, we still serve dinner promptly at 6:30. But as soon as you enter, you sense it, that strain. There is a weight in the atmosphere. It was as if you had just walked into a room filled with shouting. However, you were late by 2 minutes. It's similar to walking in fog. The invisible tension is thick. The music was not excessively loud, not aggressive. Simply be there. Each one of them is unique. Unmarried. Day. No doors are slammed. Nobody flings objects. Nobody yells. But on the inside, we're all screaming. I hear my father's voice coming from the basement. The audience responded to the newscasters if they could hear him. He yells up the stairs if we move too loudly. A few of us are attempting to focus. On what? I'm not sure. Perhaps furious. For the fifth time today, he is analyzing whatever headline it is. The living room is where my mom stays. She had her phone shining in her hand and her feet tucked under her. She is quite silent. She chuckles at things on TV. But it's fleeting and phony, as if she's telling herself she can still laugh. And me? I tread carefully, even in my house. This applies even when I'm simply shutting a door or getting a glass of water. If you live with someone who gets angry easily about everything, you become used to being small, to move silently, to vanish. You learn that from this house. Either vanish or become the next spark. My sister's visits are always brief. Her husband, who tries to lighten the situation, is beside her. But occasionally, even he gives me that look people often ask, "How can you manage to live here every day?" And I'm not sure how to respond. The anger isn't the only emotion. It's the worry about what might occur next. What happens if no one is around and my dad has a health crisis? What if my mother abruptly quits one day and goes away? What if the silence is even more intense when I get home because it has finally been broken? I've considered moving out. I'm still in school, though. I am still attempting to save myself. I can't stop worrying about what would happen to her if I did. Despite her constant silence and assurances of her well-being, I am aware that she is barely surviving. And a part of me believes that if I go, she could fall apart entirely. I therefore remain. Not because I'd like to. However, I feel compelled to. And that might be the worst thing of all. Living in a home where love has become a duty is a unique experience. Presence has taken the place of connectivity. We are no longer the same family as before. And each night, as I lay in bed, I look up at the ceiling and wonder, how have we arrived here? Even worse, will we remain here? It was a Sunday. As usual, the atmosphere was silent. There was a silence that felt empty rather than serene. As usual, my dad was in the basement. One screen shows Fox News, while the other shows a ranting podcast. With the game show humming in the background and my mom's phone lying against her knee, she was in the living room, cuddled up under the same blanket she always used. It has been on my mind for days. I'm mentally rehearsing it like a script. How to ask. It is important to know when to inquire. Should I even ask? However, something inside of me gave out that day. So I took a seat on the couch next to her. She gave me a little smile before turning back to the screen. I waited for a moment. Then, quietly, I said, "Are you happy, Mom?" She avoided eye contact. Didn't flinch. I knew she wasn't watching, but she just continued looking at the TV. I nearly said it again. Then she let out a sigh. There was a slow, lengthy sigh of exhaustion. Lastly, she stated, "I'm accustomed to it." That was it. No. The answer is no. Just adjust to it. A knot formed in my throat. She was ecstatic, which surprised me. However, that was not what I had hoped for. I walked over to her. I muttered, "That's not the same thing." At last, she turned to face me. And I saw it right then. The fatigue, the resignation, the gaping hole behind her smile. She grabbed my hand and gave it a light squeeze. "My dear," she said, "you don't always get what you desire in life. You simply manage occasionally. Control." She spoke as if she were discussing traffic gridlock or a cold. She did not live her whole life. I felt like screaming, give her a shake, inform her that she is worthy of better. Because she was still young, she could start over. Choosing peace is always possible. However, I didn't. I knew she wouldn't be ready to hear it. Perhaps she would never be. We sat in silence, I and she, Contestants on the game show were yelling about a Hawaii reward trip. With a little laugh, my mother said, "Can you picture? Imagine me at this age, wearing a bikini." I returned the smile, but my heart was sorrowful. She was dead. She was making it through. There is a kind of creeping death that is rarely discussed, and the thing that hurt me the most. She thought this was a common occurrence. When you wake up in a quiet house, beside a man who overlooked her, solving puzzles and having courteous discussions to dull herself, was in some way acceptable. She would never receive anything else. That day, I didn't push her, avoided discussing the texts with Raj, neglected to add how her laughter sounded different when she spoke to him. I merely sat there, keeping her hand in me, experiencing grief over a living woman but barely surviving. And I became aware of something unpleasant at that same moment. There are times when the saddest are quiet. Is the one you've persuaded to be peaceful? Dinner was the first event. It was just another Thursday night. My mother had prepared a simple dish of rice and veggie curry. She could prepare various types of food while sleeping. She was, let's face it, frequently in trouble. Silently, we sat at the table. My mother gazed at her dish. With little appetite, I picked at my food. And my father, well, he began to speak. Once again, politics are involved. There is a sense of disintegration within the nation. It was the typical blend of outrage, gloom, and blame. Initially, I nodded, due to habit, to protect oneself. Then he made a nasty statement regarding those who didn't agree with him, about how they were less than human, idiots, and leeches. Additionally, I was unable to remain silent. I said, "Dad, is it not possible for us to accomplish this tonight?" For once, he stopped. Split in midair, there is a narrowing of the eyes. What should I do? When I pointed to the table, I added, "This," the shouting, the political situation, the rage. Are we able to have dinner only? The ensuing hush was awful. Next, he blew up. "You believe you have the right to dictate what I can and cannot discuss in my home?" He slammed his palm against the table with such force that the silverware jumped as he yelled. My mother winced. "You believe you've surpassed me in intelligence? With your educational institution? Your degrees? You are just like everyone else, blindly following what you've been taught." He had a crimson face. Veins marked his temple. The walls echoed with the thunder of his words. I tried not to panic. I don't intend to engage in combat. I'm simply worn out. It didn't matter, though, he continued. More volume, crueler, referring to me by name. "You are falsely claiming what I said. Become the victim himself. I gave it my all for you. This roof, this cuisine. Have you disrespectfully returned the favor in front of your mother?" At that point, I caught sight of her, my mother. She stared at her dish, eyes wide, body as rigid as a statue, uttering no words. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't shocked. The idea was nothing new to her. That shattered something within me. I got to my feet. "You're right," I muttered. "This is your home. Perhaps I should leave now." He fell silent. He acted as if he hadn't anticipated my words. He acted as if he still believed that dread would keep me still. But I had grown out of my fear as a little child. I also wasn't going to continue to put up with his rage, only to give him a sense of strength. I made my way to my room and shut the door, packed a bag, sent a friend a text. Shaking, I sat on the side of my bed, but with an understanding I hadn't had in months. It was more than just a poor night. It was the final blow. For when someone makes you feel as though they are a visitor in your life, as if your voice is unimportant, as though your presence is contingent, family isn't that. Control is there. And I had had enough of him controlling me. I stayed home that evening. The shift was not due to a change in my heart. However, I had to breathe, to reflect, to ensure that the result was not a single outburst. I wanted to make a choice, mine, not his. Therefore, the first spent the night behind a locked door. I packed my bag. My heart is pounding. I didn't get much sleep. I entered the kitchen like a visitor the following morning. My father ignored me. He scrolled through his typical headlines while seated in his normal chair, as though nothing had occurred. My mother was flipping toast at the stove. She had swollen eyes, but there was a weak, weary smile on her face. She whispered, "There's tea." I gave a nod. I thanked her. Take a seat. We played pretend for a few minutes. We acted as though we were still a family. Pretended that not everything had been heard by the walls. Pretended like nothing had changed. Then, I got to my feet. I muttered, I'm going to spend a few days at Mira's. My father didn't answer. My mother stopped holding a spatula. After a time, she said, All right, no objection, no inquiries. Just, all right. That's when I realized. Both of them had already released me, in their manners. The first time he put his rage ahead of his kid, he let me go. When she no longer thought there was anything left to defend, she let me go. I walked to the door with my suitcase, put on my shoes. My mother followed me into the hallway. At first, she remained silent. He simply stood there, his hands shaking and his eyes wet. Then she said, just above a whisper, When you arrive, text me. I looked over at her. I had so many things I wanted to say. Join me. This is not how you have to live. A life that seems like yours is still something you deserve. However, I didn't mention any of them. I knew she wasn't ready. I gave her a hug instead. I have more time than I've ever had. It was more intense than I intended. She also said into my hair, You have my admiration. Never assume I'm not admiring you. My eyes filled with tears. I didn't cry, though. I did not leave the house before I left. Not until I was in the vehicle with Mira driving next to me in silence. For the first time in years, they were leaving that house. The home where birthday balloons were once displayed, messes from school projects. We had board games and pancakes on Sunday. Once upon a time, that house was home. As it dwindled in the rearview mirror, however, it seemed to have transformed into what it had become. This is a location where love died in peace. And after a long period, for the first time, I had the feeling that I could breathe. Living apart from them didn't make everything better. I cried on some evenings. I woke up confused in the mornings, expecting to hear my dad's TV hum from downstairs. There were times when remorse felt like a weighted blanket draped around my chest. We missed the familiarity, the customs. Even the silence was predictable. I didn't miss him, though. He was not the person he had turned into. I am not the person who thought love was the same as control. He caused stress in our house and referred to it as leadership. He rejected everything human, warm, and soft. Until everything was gone. There was sound. The air felt lighter at Mira's apartment. I could laugh aloud once more. I could speak without paying attention to every word. I could cook without fear of criticism for my excessive use of salt. I was unaware of how deeply I had depressed myself, until I was no longer required to. What about my mother? We send each other texts. At times, a lot. It happens sporadically, but not often. She updates me with photos of her garden, pictures of her meal, amusing memes that are only funny to mothers. However, occasionally, her words will sound like this. I saw the show you recommended. It made me laugh harder than I thought it would. Or, this morning, I took a stroll. This was my first stroll in a long time. Or, very gently, once, I'm missing you. However, I can see why you had to leave. I cry when I read those texts. Because, despite her continued presence, still residing in that home, still by a man who is blind to her, she is starting to recognize herself once more. Additionally, she might decide to depart at any point. That's her tale, though. Changing them was never my goal. I required salvation. Continuing would have gradually destroyed me. And that kind of erosion would have destroyed any degree, employment, or future. I'm creating a life now that I don't have to run away from. Slowly, silently, consciously. It's not flawless. However, it is mine. Furthermore, if you're reading this, if you've ever been seated in a tense, quiet room, if you have ever suppressed your truth out of fear of the potential explosion, have you ever noticed that someone you love no longer loves anyone at all? I'll tell you what I had to discover the hard way. Peace is not self-serving. Being far away is not betrayal. And quitting is not a sign of failure. You are free to prefer oxygen to suffocation. Laughter breaks the silence. Life is more important than surviving. And occasionally, the most courageous act you will ever do. Pack your bags silently, exit through the front door, and provide yourself the opportunity to, finally, take a breath.